That morning seemed ordinary, like any other in Springfield. The sun filtered through the trees, the birds sang their usual symphony, and old Thomas walked calmly toward the town's central bank, as he had done every first day of the month for over 20 years. But something was strange right at the entrance. The automatic door, which always opened with a soft hum, remained closed as he approached. The security guard inside waved his hand vaguely, as if to say, "Not today, sir." Thomas thought it was a sensor failure, took a step back, and tried again. Nothing. He gently tapped on the glass, waved, and waited. Then the security guard approached, and with an impersonal expression, said without opening the door, "You can't come in today." Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. Thomas was confused. But why? I've had an account here since 1984. His voice sounded weak, as if he were struggling not to shake. The security guard looked away. Inside, a few customers were eyeing him as if he were an inconvenient stranger. The strangest thing was that no one explained anything. They just said that orders from above had been passed. Thomas, with his felt hat and worn jacket, didn't seem dangerous, but he was treated like an intruder. He insisted, "Get me the manager. I've known Miss Ellen since she was an intern here." The security guard reluctantly walked away to get someone. Thomas waited outside, feeling a slight embarrassment well up in his chest. A group of young people passed by on the sidewalk and laughed. "Has the old man been up to something?" one of them whispered. Thomas pretended not to hear, but something inside him was beginning to break. The bank, that place that had always been so predictable and safe, now rejected him. Minutes later, the manager appeared. Ellen. Older, stiffer, less warm than Thomas remembered. She spoke through the security intercom on the other side of the glass. "Mr. Thomas, I need you to hold. There's an inconsistency in the records." "Inconsistency? I just came to withdraw my retirement money." "As always," he replied with dignity. The manager looked down, almost embarrassed, and asked for patience. She told him to sit on the bench in the square across the street and promised to look into it. Thomas obeyed, but his mind was racing. Something was very wrong. He began rummaging through his pockets, pulling out old papers, receipts he'd kept for years. And there it was, a document from 1992, bearing the bank's name and the board's seal. While he waited, a lady named Margaret, who was also a bank customer, approached. "Are you okay, Thomas?" He briefly explained what had happened. She frowned. "Strange. This week, $200 disappeared from my account too." It was the first spark. What had seemed like a mere misunderstanding took on a mysterious tone. Thomas began to think about every detail of the past few months. Small actions by the bank that had seemed strange now took on new meaning. Half an hour later, Ellen returned. This time, her expression had changed. She was paler, nervous, almost tense. She asked Thomas to accompany her through a side entrance, away from the eyes of the other customers. Inside the meeting room, the manager offered him a glass of water. "Mr. Thomas, we found something unusual in your file. There are records that shouldn't be there. We need to investigate further." He asked what they were, but she simply said, "They're old documents." Thomas began to sweat. "What kind of documents?" "I didn't do anything wrong." Ellen shook her head. "I know. But it looks like someone did." The silence that hung between them was almost palpable. Something was about to be unearthed. The manager left the room for a few minutes. Thomas stood alone, looking around. It was a modern room, but with old paintings on the walls. One of them caught his eye. It was a photo of the bank's founding, with smiling people holding an inaugural ribbon. In the lower right corner of the photo, almost faded by time, stood someone Thomas recognized. His father. Young, strong, in a light-colored suit. Beside him, a woman with a serious expression. And between them, a boy. Himself. Thomas stood up, overcome with emotion. I'd never known that photo existed, or that his father had been so involved with the bank. Memories flooded back, half-heard conversations, family secrets never explained. When Ellen returned, he showed her the photo. "My father. He helped found this bank?" The manager hesitated. "Mr. Thomas, there are many things that haven't been officially recorded. But it seems your name is on a list that was filed by mistake. Or not." She handed over an envelope. Yellowed, fragile. Inside was a letterhead, dated 1978. It was a contract, and on it, Thomas's name was listed as co-heir to a trust created for the original founders. What no one knew was that the fund had been deactivated in the 1990s, supposedly due to a lack of direct heirs. But Thomas's name was there, typed. Official. Signed. Ellen looked troubled. That document, it shouldn't be here. It was filed in a section called Classification Z, which we only use for very old and confidential documents. She lowered her voice. No one in the new board knew about it. Thomas felt his legs weaken. He'd spent all those years living modestly, unaware that something was in store for him. Something that could have changed his life decades ago. The question was, who hid it from him? The manager made a discreet phone call. She summoned an HR employee who had worked there since the 1980s. When he walked into the room and saw Thomas, he froze in time. "My God! Are you little Tom? Mr. Walter's son?" Thomas nodded. The man covered his mouth, visibly moved. "Your father saved this bank from bankruptcy in '76. There was a secret meeting, something that couldn't be documented publicly for legal reasons." The mood in the room shifted, from a bureaucratic misunderstanding to something much bigger. Secrets kept for more than 4 decades began to emerge. Thomas didn't know whether to feel anger, relief, or fear. But he knew this was just the beginning. Outside, customers continued to enter and leave the bank, unaware of what was happening behind those walls. Inside, a dormant story was beginning to awaken. And it all began with a door that simply didn't open. Thomas's heart sank as he watched Ellen lock the room. Her confident demeanor contrasted with the nervousness that crept into her expression. "We need to talk away from prying eyes," she said, looking around. They walked down a narrow hallway, past doors marked Employees Only. Thomas noticed details he'd never seen before. It was as if the bank had a hidden side, reserved only for those who knew too much. As they reached a small file room, Ellen took a deep breath. "I need to show you something, but I also need your word that you'll keep this confidential until we know exactly what we're up against." Thomas simply nodded seriously. She opened an old cabinet with a rusty padlock and pulled out a folder marked with a red seal, Restricted Access, 1978. Thomas's full name was handwritten on the label. It was the first time he'd seen his own name on something so confidential. Inside, documents, newspaper clippings, and even bank records showed transactions made in the name of Walter M. Jefferson, his father. But the strangest thing was a handwritten letter addressed to him, with instructions for a meeting that never took place. Thomas began to tremble. The letter was dated October 5, 1992. The same day his father suffered a fatal heart attack. It was as if he had something important to reveal, and he didn't have time. "Why didn't anyone tell me any of this?" Thomas asked. Ellen looked away. "Because someone didn't want you to know." And that's when the internal phone rang. She answered it and was silent for several long seconds. When she hung up, she sounded even more nervous. "The board wants to speak with me." "No." Thomas wanted to go with her, but she asked him to stay. "It's safer this way for now." And she left, leaving the folder in his hands. Alone, Thomas began to sift through the papers. He found an old receipt for a very large cash deposit made out to a certain Willow Creek Foundation. He'd never heard of it, but the address was in Springfield. Curiosity piqued, Thomas jotted down the name and address. It was as if the past was sending him clues, one after another, waiting to finally be revealed. And he had no more time to waste. Ellen returned, pale. "The board asked me to seal all the documents and hand them over to legal security." Thomas protested. "This can't be buried again." But she was in shock. They knew. They've been monitoring this file. 4 months. It was clear. The bank had something to hide. And now that Thomas had set foot on that trail, he couldn't turn back. "You have to tell me the truth, Ellen. Everything." She hesitated. Then she sat down and began to tell. She said she stumbled upon the folder 3 months earlier while conducting an internal audit. When she saw the name, Thomas Jefferson, something struck a chord. That's when she remembered the kind man who always came to collect her benefits. But what frightened her most was an alert in the digital system. Every time his name was typed, an automatic protocol blocked information. "It's like your name is under surveillance, Thomas. Since 1992. He closed his eyes for a moment. The feeling of having lived in the dark for so many years was overwhelming. "What was my father trying to protect me from?" he murmured. Ellen couldn't answer. But there was one way to find out: go to the Willow Creek Foundation. Before they could decide their next move, the room's intercom rang. A dry voice. "Miss Ellen, you are relieved of your duties until further notice. Please accompany security to HR." She was shocked. Thomas tried to intervene, but was ignored. The manager, visibly shaken, was escorted out of the room. A new manager, named Craig, took over immediately. Young, gruff, and with a smile that hid something. "Are you ready to leave?" But Thomas wasn't there. "I want to speak to the board. I have documents that belong to me." Craig crossed his arms. "These documents are now in the institution's custody. If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to call the authorities." The threat was clear. But before leaving, Thomas quickly hid one of the smaller pieces of paper from the briefcase, folding it and stuffing it into his sock. It was the Foundation's full address. That was all he needed. Outside, the sun was already higher. The world seemed the same, but Thomas knew otherwise. Now he carried something heavier than time, the sleeping truth. And he needed to know what his father's name meant in this story. On his way home, Thomas passed a small church. He went in and sat in the back pew. He said nothing, but wept silently. For the first time in years, he felt lost, and at the same time, strangely close to God. An elderly woman sat beside him without asking any questions. She simply held his hand. It was as if the Lord knew he needed a sign. Thomas didn't have answers, but he had faith. And that was enough to keep him going. That night, at home, he reread the hidden paper. The Willow Creek Foundation operated outside downtown, near an old abandoned field. He remembered going there with his father as a child, but he never knew the reason for the visit. The place had always been known as private property, and for years it remained closed. But now, it seemed more than a forgotten building. It was a key. Something that connected the past, the present, and perhaps the future. On the back of the paper was a hand-scrawled, almost faded phrase: "If anything happens to me, this is where everything is kept." Thomas recognized his father's handwriting. This was no coincidence. He knew he needed to go there. But he also knew he couldn't go alone. He needed someone who understood records, documents, and, above all, faith. Someone like the town's former librarian, Sarah. Sarah had always been a family friend. She managed the town's historical archives and had an enviable memory. When Thomas called her, he heard her cheerful voice. "Of course I remember you, Tom. And I remember the Willow Creek Foundation. It has a complicated history behind it." She promised to meet him the next morning with some files. But before hanging up, she said something that echoed, "The last person who tried to investigate the Foundation has disappeared." Thomas swallowed hard. The fear returned. But now, mixed with something new. A strength that came from above, from within, from afar. A certainty that he was not alone on this journey. And that each unanswered question was, in fact, an invitation to delve deeper. He looked at the old photo he'd taken with his cell phone at the bank, the one of the building's foundation. And he noticed a detail he hadn't noticed before. Behind his father stood a smiling man, wearing the same ring the new manager, Craig, was wearing today. It couldn't be a coincidence. Everything was connected by invisible threads. The past was about to reveal itself. And without even knowing it, Thomas had already set foot inside Springfield's best-kept secret. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Thomas arrived at the former Willow Creek Foundation location. The place looked abandoned, with its ivy-covered facade and a wooden sign cracked in half. But there was something there, a heavy silence, as if time had stopped. Sarah was already waiting for him, with a folder full of old documents and newspapers. "I thought you were crazy, but the more I read, the more it made sense." She showed him an article from 1979, Willow Creek Foundation, the donation no one wants to explain. Thomas felt his heart race. The article talked about $1 million sum that had appeared in the foundation's coffers with no clear origin. What's more, it said the money would be used for educational and community purposes, but no one ever saw any concrete results. As they pushed the front door, to their surprise, it opened with a sharp click. The interior was dusty but intact. There were antique furniture, archives, paintings, and at the end of the main hallway, an iron door, locked with a rusty padlock. Sarah noticed something curious. A stained-glass window above the door depicted a biblical figure holding a golden key. "This is symbolic, Tom. Someone hid more than just papers in here. I bet the safe is behind this door." Thomas picked up an old key he found in a drawer in the entryway. To his surprise, it fit perfectly. The padlock opened with a subtle click, as if it had been waiting decades for this moment. Inside the room, the air was fresher, as if sealed off from time. In the center was an antique safe, the kind you only see in movies. Beside it, a table with a Bible open to Psalm 91. Sarah whispered, "It's protection. Someone really trusted God here." They searched for a combination, but nothing was obvious. Until Thomas remembered something. "My father. He always said that the most important numbers in a man's life were those of birth, faith, and farewell." They tried dates, and on the third try, the safe opened. Inside, there was no money. But there was something far more valuable: folders with bank stamps, handwritten letters, and cassette tapes. One of them was marked, "Confidential, WMJ Case." Thomas recognized it, his father's initials. Sarah pulled an old tape recorder from her bag. She'd brought it instinctively. As she inserted the tape, they heard an older man's voice. It was Walter, Thomas's father. He spoke urgently, explaining that he had uncovered a conspiracy within the bank. Walter mentioned an unauthorized transfer of foundation funds to directors' private accounts, and that when he threatened to report it, he received threats. He also said he had hidden copies of the documents to protect his future and his son. Thomas fell to his knees. "My father knew he was in danger." Sarah hugged him. The emotion of that moment was indescribable. More than just papers, that safe contained truths that had been suppressed for decades. Among the documents was a list of names. Some Thomas recognized. They were names of influential families in the city. But one name in particular was circled in red: Howard L. Craig. The same last name as the new manager. The connection was direct. Howard was the son of Leonard Craig, one of the bank's founders and the alleged mastermind behind the embezzlement. The plan seemed simple: cover their tracks, silence those involved, and maintain control of the institution forever. But Walter didn't keep quiet. He recorded evidence. He hid files. And now, decades later, his son had found his way. A cycle was about to close, or explode into scandal. Sarah, determined, said this needed to be taken to the press. But Thomas hesitated. "They might try to silence me too," she replied firmly. "Then the whole town will know before they try." Before leaving, Thomas found one more thing inside the safe: an envelope with his name handwritten on it. Inside was an old photo of him as a child, with his father, in front of the bank. On the back, a phrase: "You are stronger than you think." He tucked the photo into his pocket, like an emotional shield. Outside, the world continued to spin, but for him, everything had changed. He now carried a mission: to restore the truth, to honor the legacy, and to protect those who still believed in justice. But they weren't alone. A black car was watching them from across the street. The driver wore sunglasses and was talking on his cell phone. Sarah noticed first. "We're being followed, Tom." It was the beginning of a new, silent chase. Back home, Thomas hid the documents in a metal box inside the closet. Sarah suggested digitizing everything. "If something happens, we need to make sure the truth doesn't disappear again." That night, while copying the files, Thomas received an anonymous call. The voice was distorted. "Stop digging into the past, or you'll end up like your father." He hung up immediately, his hands shaking. But instead of retreating, something inside him flared. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the people who had been deceived. About dignity, honor, and faith. And about breaking the cycle of silence that haunted Springfield. The next day, they returned to the bank. But something was strange. There was unusual activity. Police officers, reporters, and angry customers. Thomas and Sarah looked at each other. Someone had leaked the information. The Director General had disappeared. Craig was being escorted by officers. And Walter Jefferson's name was being repeated everywhere. It was as if a ghost from the past had returned to settle a score. Thomas was recognized by a local journalist, who asked for an interview. He declined, it wasn't time yet. But he handed over a copy of the tape. "Just make sure the truth gets where it needs to go." And he left silently. Sarah suggested they go to City Hall. Perhaps there were more forgotten archives there. Thomas agreed. But not before doing something he'd been putting off for years, visiting his father's grave. At the cemetery, he knelt before the headstone. "Dad, I know now. I know what you tried to tell me. I'll finish this, even if it hurts." A butterfly landed on his shoulder at that moment. Sarah smiled. Signs from God. But what neither of them knew was that, behind the scenes, Leonard Craig's old allies were meeting to contain the crisis. And that the next step would be even riskier. Because the safe had revealed truths, but there were still files hidden within the bank itself. Something throbbed in Thomas's memory, a secret door he'd seen as a child, inside the Central Archives. A door bearing the Craig family crest. Perhaps there lay the final piece of the puzzle. And to get there, he would need courage, faith, and maybe unexpected help. The morning light filtered through Thomas's window softly, as if the day knew great revelations were coming. He woke earlier than usual, a vivid memory haunting him, the old portrait he'd seen in the bank room. He remembered clearly. In that black-and-white photo, hidden among the Foundation's paintings, a woman stood out. Elegant, with a firm gaze, as if she were keeping too many secrets. And she was between two men, one, his father, the other, Craig. Thomas couldn't get her face out of his head. She wasn't just another historical figure. There was something about her that unsettled him. Something familiar, though he couldn't explain why. It was as if the image spoke directly to his soul. He decided to head to the town library, where Sarah was already waiting for him. As he described the woman in the photo, she froze for a moment. "Tom, you just described Mildred Crane, one of the original founders of the bank. And you know what's weirdest? She never had children." This piqued their curiosity even more. Sarah dug up old files. In one of the donation records folders, they found the same photo. And beneath it, a barely legible caption, "Dedication, Founding Donors, W. M. Jefferson, L. Craig, M. Crane." Sarah commented quietly, Mildred was considered eccentric. Single, religious, and very private. They say she disappeared mysteriously in 1985, leaving no trace. But some say she was silenced. Thomas felt a chill. Something about this story felt too personal. When they requested Mrs. Crane's complete files, they found only partial copies. Her file was sealed. Access restricted. Once again. They then searched the city records. And there, something surprising, Mildred's will was digitized, but incomplete. The last page, with the final clause, was missing. As if someone had intentionally removed the most important part. The surprise came when she saw the penultimate clause. She left a trust fund under the bank's custody, destined for a direct blood beneficiary, whose name would only be revealed after her death. The problem? The heir's name was never officially revealed. Thomas froze. Sarah did too. And then she spoke, her voice hesitant. "Tom, do you have any connection to the Crane name? Any memories of your mother? Distant relatives?" He was silent for a few seconds. And then he remembered. It was a summer afternoon. He was about 10 years old. He was at his grandmother's house, and he heard her arguing with his father. She said something like, "You shouldn't have hidden his origins. Mildred trusted you." "And his father replied?" she asked. "And I promised." That memory, which had seemed insignificant until then, now sounded like a bombshell. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Tom, what if you're that heir? What if Mildred is your biological mother?" He staggered. "But, my birth certificate, my mother's name was Dorothy." Sarah picked up the phone and made a quick call. She contacted the registry office. She requested Thomas's original birth certificate. The document was emailed within minutes. And there, a shocking difference. The digital version listed Dorothy Jefferson as the registered mother, but the original scanned document had a different signature. The handwritten name was M. Crane. And a note in red pen, replaced as per request of legal guardian. Thomas gasped. This was real. Mildred Crane was, indeed, his biological mother. Everything was beginning to fall into place. The portrait, the emotional connection, the hidden background, the unnamed inheritance, and above all, the constant feeling that there was something in his life he had never fully understood. Sarah hugged him. "Tom, this changes everything. The inheritance is yours. But more than that, your mother's story needs to be told. She was erased from history." Thomas didn't know whether to cry or smile. "She left me. But maybe, to protect me." He began researching everything he could about Mildred. He discovered that she founded women's shelters, contributed to local churches, and funded scholarships for orphaned youth. She was a woman of faith, intelligence, and courage, but also of silence. In a letter found in the archives of a local Baptist church, Mildred wrote, "My son will never know who I am, but I will know before God that I loved him enough to hide him from greed." This broke Thomas's heart. "She gave me to my father, so he could raise me in peace. So I wouldn't be targeted." Sarah agreed. "And now it's all coming to light. Because the moment of truth has arrived." They knew they were messing with ancient and powerful forces. Back at the foundation, Thomas searched through the old paintings. And there she was again, Mildred. But now, he saw her with different eyes. Not as a historical figure, but as his mother. And beside her, another, smaller painting, that no one noticed. It was an oil painting of a cross amidst a golden field. Beside it, a Latin inscription, Veritas Vincit, Truth Wins. Thomas touched the frame gently. It was a silent testament. But not all was well with that discovery. The next day, Thomas's house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, just ransacked. And a single piece of paper was left on the table, Mrs. Crane's photo, torn in half. It was a message. Someone wanted him to stop. Someone was ready to erase Mildred once more. But this time, Thomas wouldn't let that happen. "No more silence," he said. "No more fear." Sarah suggested seeking legal help. Thomas agreed. But first, he wanted to visit one last place, the convent where Mildred had lived before becoming the bank's founder. There, he hoped to find answers, and perhaps some peace. The convent, simple and silent, welcomed him with respect. One of the older sisters, named Sister Elise, recognized him immediately. "You have her eyes." She handed Thomas a box Mildred had left many years ago. "For when he finds out." Inside the box was a journal. Mildred wrote about faith, fear, difficult choices, and unconditional love. She concluded with a prayer, "Lord, watch over my son, even if he doesn't know who I am. May he find the truth, and forgive my silence." Thomas wept for long minutes. And there, in the silence of that convent, he felt for the first time that his identity was finally complete. But he knew the struggle was only beginning. Because now he didn't just carry a name, he carried a legacy. And the next step would be to prove, before the courts and the entire town, that Mildred existed, loved, protected, and was betrayed. And to do that, he would need to get to the bottom of what he feared most, the missing will. The revelation about Mildred Crane shook everything Thomas believed about his life. He was no longer just an ordinary man. He was the heir to a buried history. And now, he needed the most important piece of this puzzle, his mother's original will. Sarah suggested starting at the registry office where the foundation's records were kept. It was an old building, smelling of decades of stored paper. There, an elderly clerk named Mr. Baldwin greeted them reluctantly. Mildred Crane? That's a complicated subject. When they heard her name, it seemed the air changed temperature. There was an unspoken silence on every face, as if everyone knew that touching this woman's past involved risks. But Thomas insisted. I need the original will. Not the digital one. The real one. Mr. Baldwin looked around, lowered his voice, and said something that would change the course of history. The original will was removed from here in 1994. By court order. And sealed as confidential. Never seen again. Thomas couldn't believe it. But how could a will disappear like that? The clerk replied coldly, when power is involved, even the truth learns to hide itself. It was like a punch in the gut. Sarah, restless, began calling former lawyers in town. One name surfaced, Martha Dellinger, a retired lawyer who in the 1980s was responsible for formalizing donations and inheritances for prominent local families. Perhaps she knew more. When they visited Martha, they found a lucid, witty, 92-year-old woman. Upon hearing Mildred's name, she narrowed her eyes and said, she was special. I was forbidden to talk about her will. But now, I think God wants the truth to come out. Martha revealed that Mildred had left 3 copies of the document. 2 were filed, one at the foundation and one at the registry office. The third, however, was personally delivered to her trusted pastor, with instructions to keep it secret until her son arrived. Thomas could barely breathe. And this pastor is still alive? Martha nodded. Reverend Henry Coleman. He now lives in seclusion in a rural nursing home. But he was the one who kept the will, or so we hoped. Wasting no time, they set off for the indicated location. The nursing home was simple, surrounded by green fields and tall trees. The ambience resembled an American countryside painting, peaceful on the outside, full of stories on the inside. Upon arrival, a nurse led Thomas to the Reverend. Already weakened, but with bright eyes, Henry looked at him as if he recognized him immediately. You're the boy, the child of promise. That made Thomas shiver. The Reverend held out his hand and, with difficulty, urged him closer. Your mother trusted God above all else. But she also trusted me. She said that one day, her son would seek answers. He pointed to an old wooden box under the bed. Inside the box were yellowed papers, a hand-carved wooden cross, and an envelope sealed with red wax. The name was handwritten, Thomas Crane Jefferson. It was the last copy of the will. Thomas's hands trembled. Reverend Henry touched his hand and prayed softly, Lord, may truth shine even in the darkness, and may righteousness flourish like a green field in harvest. Peace filled the room. Opening the envelope, Thomas read silently. Mildred left all her assets, property, and funds to the Willow Creek Foundation, with a special clause, that her legitimate son, Thomas, would assume sole moral and legal responsibility for the Foundation's mission. What's more, it included a formal complaint about illegal embezzlement at the bank, with names, dates, and documents attached. She had foreseen everything. She tried to protect the future with frightening precision. But the document had a catch. It would only be legally valid if presented along with the other 2 copies. And since the others were either missing or in the bank's possession, Thomas would have to prove the authenticity of that version. Sarah was silent for a moment, then said, Tom, we have your father's recording. We have Foundation records. We have the files that were in the vault. We can cross-reference all of this. But Thomas knew, taking on the bank meant taking on the entire system. Later that night, something unexpected happened. Sarah's home was broken into. The computer containing the digitized files was taken. But no personal items were stolen. It was clear they were after the truth. And they would do everything they could to prevent her from leaving. Even so, a copy of the tape with Walter Jefferson's voice was safe, hidden in the church where Thomas prayed every morning. He knew that faith would be his greatest weapon. And now also his greatest shield. The will, carefully stored in a sturdy folder, was taken to a federal attorney. After review, he confirmed, Mildred's signature matched other official documents. It was authentic. But they would need to notarize it again, with witnesses. Thomas organized a small event in the Foundation's chapel. He invited longtime residents, bank customers who had been harmed, local journalists, and religious leaders. There, in front of everyone, he read part of the will aloud. "My truth has been silenced by fear. But I will not let faith die with me. My son will know who he is, and that God will guide him on the path of righteousness." Tears streamed from the eyes of many present. Upon learning of the transaction, the bank issued a statement stating that documents without legal validity would not be recognized. But Thomas had already expected this. And he had one last trump card, the ledger hidden in the wall of the Foundation's former boardroom. According to Martha, this book contained secret signatures, where members recorded confidential decisions. If Mildred's name were there as founder and benefactor, it could be the final missing piece. But the book had disappeared over 30 years ago. Or so they thought. Thomas, walking through Mildred's old office, noticed a loose baseboard behind a bookcase. Pulling it back, he found a built-in box. And inside, the book. Upon opening, the inauguration page was intact. 3 signatures, Walter M. Jefferson, Leonard Craig, and Mildred Crane. Below them, the handwritten phrase, "In the name of faith, justice, and legacy." And a gold wax seal. It was the final proof. But as he left the Foundation, Thomas noticed the black car was back. Parked on the corner. No one inside. Just the warning in red letters on the windshield, "Silence protects. Truth destroys." The battle was far from over. Deep down, he knew, revealing that will to the world would not only change the city's history, but would expose very powerful people. And they would do everything they could to keep the shadows where they had always been. But the light had already been lit. And Thomas's next decision would be the hardest of all, to unlock the secrets hidden within the bank's walls, even if it cost him everything he had left. The first light of dawn was barely illuminating the streets of Springfield when Thomas parked his car in front of the bank building. His heart was pounding in his chest, a mixture of fear and determination. He knew he was entering a place where ancient secrets still breathed among the rafters. He clutched the ledger, clutching it to his chest. It was his shield and his compass. His father's and Mildred's signatures were there, a living reminder of the buried truth that needed to emerge. Sarah appeared behind him, her steps firm and her voice soft. She held a small toolkit. "Ready when you are," she said, and together they walked toward the entrance. Inside the bank, the atmosphere seemed the same, but the air was dense, filled with stares and suspicion. No security guards blocked their path. It was as if an invisible force was guiding them, protecting their mission. Thomas pulled the old elevator, with its iron doors and bars, up to the 3rd floor, where the director's office had once been, now closed and dusty. The hallway seemed unremarkable. But Thomas remembered one night, as a child, watching his father loosen a panel on the wall, opening a secret compartment. He approached, felt the texture of the wood, and moved the loose part. A false door opened, revealing narrow stairs. He took a deep breath, holding it. "This is it," he whispered. They descended together, the dim light revealing a damp, stuffy underground room. Shadows danced on the walls, accomplices to the hidden code. Inside that room was something impressive. Walls covered in papers, yellowed files, city maps with markings and dates, old photographs, and an old-fashioned trunk, sealed with ropes and an official seal, the Jefferson family crest. The first twist, the chest was sealed with the same golden seal that had been used on the Foundation's record book. It was the link that united generations, secrets, and faith. As if Mildred and Walter had planned it all with eternal symbolic resources. Sarah, running her fingers along the strings, found a mechanism that released the seal. The chest creaked open, and inside was an ancient key? Or perhaps a fragment of metal engraved with symbols they didn't immediately recognize. This was the second twist. Thomas picked up the object, which gleamed in the dim light of the lamps. It looked like a piece of an ancient sheet music medallion. On the back was a Latin inscription, Praesidium Veritatis, protection of truth. This changed everything. In the underground room, there were also old engravings showing the founding of the bank, and the box containing the deposited documents, the trunk, was depicted on them, as if someone hoped it would one day be discovered. Added to this was a gold inscription in the corners, "He who seeks will find," John 7 verse 7. The third suspenseful segment, a loud noise echoed up the stairs. Footsteps descended quickly. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. They should leave before they were discovered. but something froze them. It was as if a whisper whispered, "You're almost there." They entered a side compartment, hidden behind an old bookcase. They watched through the crack as the door opened upstairs. A stern-looking warden entered, speaking into the radio about enhanced security underground. It was the final click. They were running out of time. Thomas wrapped up the papers and the old object and made their way back carefully, slipping down the makeshift staircase. As they emerged into the empty hallway, their hearts were still beating like war drums. But outside, the mood was different. A group of newspapers had already been tipped off. Reports that morning announced, "Bank embroiled in corruption ring, old documents reveal hidden scandals." Their move had been anticipated, someone silently on their side. Thomas and Sarah looked at each other. The discovery within the bank walls wasn't just symbolic. It was physical evidence that gave new meaning to what had seemed like a game of power and silence. They had something real, strong, irrefutable. Back at the foundation, they entered a room with more records of the city's history. It was like connecting the dots, secret corridors, hidden records, pieces that fit together into a larger mosaic. And the growing sense that they had only scratched the surface. In the end, as they looked at the walls, they knew, this bank held secrets buried eons ago. Secrets that intertwined faith, greed, love, protection, and a truth that needed to come to light, even if it cost everything, even if the next step was facing the fall of the empire around them. The foundation seemed quieter than usual that morning. Thomas felt an unease in his chest that he couldn't explain. It was as if the truth was too close, and so was the danger. As they organized the documents discovered in the underground vault, Sarah suggested compiling all the information into a dossier. "We need to turn this over to the Department of Justice. They can't ignore us with so much evidence." Thomas agreed, but cautiously. "We need only trust those who are on our side." And that was when the first crack appeared. An envelope had been left at the foundation's door, with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was familiar. And the contents, explosive. The letter accused Sarah of being a double informant. It said she was passing information to the bank in exchange for legal immunity. Thomas stood still, unsure what to think. Sarah entered the room seconds later and noticed the envelope in his hands. "What is this?" Thomas hesitated, but then showed it to her. Her reaction was immediate. "This is a lie. Someone is trying to divide us." But a seed of doubt had already been planted. "Why would anyone write this?" he asked. Sarah, tears in her eyes, replied, "Because we're too close to the truth. And they know that if they separate us, everything falls apart." Thomas wanted to believe, but something in his heart still ached. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He replayed every moment with Sarah, every decision, every piece of information revealed. Everything seemed to fit together. But what if she was playing both sides? The next morning, he confronted her directly. "You have to be honest with me, Sarah. Is there something you haven't told me?" She took a deep breath. "Yes. But it's not what you think." Sarah revealed that years ago, she had a relationship with Craig. It was brief, no strings attached, but enough to create a bond she'd rather forget. "He tried to recruit me. But when I heard Mildred's story, I changed sides." Thomas was shocked. The revelation tore his heart in two. "You were involved with a man who tried to destroy my family?" Sarah tried to defend herself. "I was young, naive. He lied to me too." Just then, Thomas's phone rang. It was an unknown number. When he answered, he heard a recording, "Be careful who you trust. Sometimes betrayal comes from those who help you the most." The call dropped. A chill ran down his spine. Thomas left the foundation and went to the local church. He needed peace, silence, guidance. Sitting in the back pew, he prayed softly, "Lord, show me who is with me and who is against me. I need to see with the eyes of the Spirit." The pastor approached. There are times when God allows the pain of betrayal to reveal His true purposes. But there are also times when He uses pain to unite those who are meant to walk together. That kept ringing in Thomas's head. He returned to the foundation, determined to give Sarah one last chance. He found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, her eyes red. "If you're with me, Truly, we need to trust each other. Otherwise, this whole thing will fall apart. She looked at him sincerely. I'm with you. And I'll prove it. She handed him a flash drive. This has copies of everything I've found in the last few months, including Craig. If I were a traitor, I'd never give you this. Thomas analyzed the files. They contained confidential documents, audio recordings, intercepted messages. A veritable arsenal against the bank. And there was the third twist, an audio recording in which Craig planned to incriminate Thomas himself. We'll manipulate the Foundation's accounts and hold him accountable for money laundering. If he goes to jail, everything goes down with him. Thomas closed his eyes. Now he knew. The enemy wasn't Sarah. It was Craig. And he was willing to do anything. Sarah took his hand. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything sooner. I just wanted to protect you. He nodded. We have no room for error now. They're going to attack. And we need to be ready. The next step was clear. Gather a group of allies. People from the community, the press, the justice system, everyone who had been wronged or who still believed in the truth. It was time to prepare for a clean, but real war. The first meeting took place in secret, at the home of a former history teacher in the city. About a dozen people were there, all with stories of injustice, broken promises, and losses caused by the bank. Thomas presented the will. Sarah showed the audio recordings. The mood was one of shock, but also hope. For the first time, there was a plan. For the first time, the entire city was beginning to wake up. But before the meeting could end, a loud knock on the door interrupted the silence. An envelope was left on the floor, unnoticed by who placed it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. A name written in large letters, Sarah McNeil, priority target. Thomas closed his eyes. They know you're with me now. Sarah simply replied, then it's a sign we're exactly where we're supposed to be. It was the beginning of the counterattack. And also of a quiet redemption. That night, Thomas dreamed of his mother. Mildred stood in a field of flowers, her hands outstretched. Do not be afraid, my son. Betrayal only has power when you give up. But you were born to resist. He awoke with a new clarity. The faith he carried in his heart was greater than any evil plan. And now, more than ever, he was ready to face the truth before the world. Even if the price was high. Because deep down, he knew, the greatest betrayal wasn't Sarah's. It was the one the city had suffered for decades. It was the forced silence. The truth erased. And it was time to reverse all of this. With courage. With faith. And with justice. The sun had barely risen when the headlines began to appear. Elderly man discovers banking scandal linked to the founding of a historic city. It was as if the past had finally woken up screaming for justice. Thomas watched television in silence, his eyes fixed on the image of the bank's facade. The report showed documents, recordings, photos of the foundation, everything that had been buried for years between walls and complicit silences. Sarah, sitting nearby, whispered prayers. She knew the exposure was necessary, but also dangerous. Now, all eyes were on them. And with that, attacks would come from all directions. The city's social media exploded. Residents who had been deceived by the bank for years began sharing their stories. Widows, war veterans, retired teachers, all with one thing in common: inexplicable losses and broken promises. One of the most moving messages came from an 83-year-old woman named Ellen Ward. Now I understand why my husband cried when he looked at his bank statement. He always said something was wrong. God bless this man for bringing light into the darkness. Little by little, Thomas's face became a symbol of resistance. But he didn't want fame. He wanted justice. And he wanted, more than anything, to honor Mildred, his mother, and Walter, his father. They were the ones who planted the seed of truth, even in silence. The foundation received hundreds of visitors that day. Curious people, journalists, lawyers. Everyone wanted to know more. But Thomas knew, not everything could be said at once. Some truths were still too dangerous for the world. It was in this tense atmosphere that a press conference was scheduled. In the Foundation's small chapel, Thomas stood before microphones and cameras. His voice was calm but firm. "Today is not about me. It's about all of us. It's about faith. And about justice." He showed parts of the will. He played the tape of his father's voice. He read excerpts from Mildred's diary. And, with tears in his eyes, he concluded, "My mother gave her life to protect this town. And now, it's our turn to protect it." The applause was moving. But among the faces in the crowd, Thomas noticed a familiar look. The new bank manager, Craig Jr., was watching him coolly. And at the same moment, 3 subpoenas arrived. Thomas, Sarah, and Martha Dellinger would be sued for defamation. The strategy was clear: intimidate, delay, silence. But it was too late. The Department of Justice announced a formal investigation. The documents submitted by Thomas were authenticated by experts. And the bank, for the first time, was up against the wall. However, the most surprising part was yet to come. A former bank employee named Lucy secretly approached Thomas. She gave him a flash drive. "I kept this out of fear, but now I know I can't keep quiet anymore." The contents were devastating. Spreadsheets showing systematic embezzlement of funds dating back to 1990. Names, amounts, signatures, and highlighted, a hidden account in the Cayman Islands, in the name of Leonard Craig. Sarah, upon seeing the files, turned pale. With this, the case ceases to be moral. It becomes criminal. Thomas knew the end was near. But the road would still be long. They needed to prepare for court. The town began to divide. Some defended the bank, saying it was all a misunderstanding. But the majority sided with Thomas. And that was disturbing. The anonymous threats resumed. Letters were left at the foundation. Glass was broken at night. Still, Thomas remained steadfast. He drew strength from his faith. He read the Psalms daily. And he prayed for protection, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. "Lord, be my rock in the midst of the storm, and may your truth prevail." On the eve of the public hearing, something almost miraculous happened. One of the bank's retired directors, Harold Whitmore, called Thomas. "I want to confess. I saw everything. I kept quiet out of fear. But now, I want peace with God." The next day, Harold appeared on camera. He recounted how Craig and other founders had embezzled millions over the decades, using the foundation as a front. Walter tried to stop it. Mildred did too. And that's why they were erased. The words fell like a bolt of lightning over Springfield. Now it was no longer a suspicion. It was a confession. The bank tried to defend itself, but the damage was already done. Shares plummeted. The headquarters was sealed off by court order. Amidst all this chaos, Thomas received an unexpected visitor. Ellen, the former manager, appeared with an envelope. "I found this hidden behind the old boardroom. It's a receipt, signed by Leonard Craig. It confirms the stolen funds." She cried as she handed him the paper. "Forgive me, Tom. I knew some things, but I didn't have the courage to act." Thomas hugged her. "You're acting now, and that's what matters." On television, a journalist concluded her report with a striking sentence: "A simple man, a forgotten foundation, and a truth that has stood the test of time. In Springfield, faith and courage are overcoming silence." Sarah, beside Thomas, held his hand tightly. "Tomorrow, we'll go to court. And we'll show that truth, when born of love, never dies." He just nodded. He was ready. They were ready. But what no one knew was that, behind the scenes, even more powerful forces were trying to influence the trial. Politicians, businesspeople, and even religious figures involved with the bank were beginning to make moves. And as Thomas prepared for court, a note was left in his mailbox. Unsigned. Just one sentence: "If you enter that room, you will never come out the same." It was the final warning. But for Thomas, there was no turning back. The truth was lit. And now, it could never be extinguished, even if it cost everything. Because certain truths, when they come to light, illuminate even the deepest darkness. The Springfield courthouse was packed that morning. People crowded the hallways, the sidewalk, and the steps. There was anticipation in the air, as if the entire town knew that this wasn't just another day, It was the day the truth would be heard. Thomas arrived early, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. On her chest, she wore a brooch bearing the wooden cross Mildred had left at the convent. Not as an ornament, but as a shield. A reminder that her faith was stronger than any human court. Sarah walked beside him, her expression firm. Despite all her fears, she was there. Ready to speak. Ready to expose the rottenness of a story that for decades had been fueled by silence and omission. At the entrance, protesters held signs, "Justice for Walter and Mildred," "Truth never dies," and "Enough lies." It was the voice of the city echoing in unison. A city tired of being manipulated by the same invisible hands. On the other side, the bank's lawyers arrived in dark, escorted cars, carrying bulging briefcases and tense expressions. Leonard Craig Jr. kept his gaze fixed, cold, as if he still believed that power could bury the truth. As they entered the courtroom, silence fell. All eyes turned to the judge, an experienced man known for his impartiality. Today we begin the trial involving the origins of the Willow Creek Foundation and formal charges against the Bank of Springfield. The state prosecutor took the floor and presented his case forcefully. He presented Mildred's will, the files discovered in the safe, the underground records, Thomas's father's recordings, and the documents provided by Lucy, the former employee. The defense attempted to discredit the documents, citing legal weaknesses and lack of official registration. But the blow came with the arrival of Harold Whitmore, a former director of the bank, who took the stand with slow but determined steps. "I saw everything. I signed everything. I kept quiet out of fear, but today, I want peace with God." His words echoed like an explosion. And when he showed the spreadsheets with his own signature, the court seemed to freeze for a second. Thomas watched him with teary eyes. The courage of an old man breaking his pact of silence rekindled hope. And it also set the stage for the most anticipated moment, his own testimony. When the judge called him, Thomas calmly stood. He took a deep breath and walked to the center of the room. There, with his hands resting on the Bible, he took the oath. His voice, though firm, trembled with the weight of memory. "My name is Thomas Crane Jefferson. For decades, I lived as an ordinary man. But recently, I discovered that I am the biological son of Mildred Crane, one of the founders of the Willow Creek Foundation. And with this discovery came evidence of a conspiracy that destroyed lives." He recounted every step, from the day he was barred from the bank, to the cassette tape with his father's voice. He talked about the portrait, the safe, the hidden will, his mother's diary. And in the end, he held up the wooden cross. "This was my inheritance." And with it came the truth. The judge called for silence after the commotion. But it was impossible to contain the tears on many faces. The force of Thomas's words cut through the air like a hot summer wind, simple, direct, yet devastating. The defense tried to counter. They called in experts and tried to discredit Sarah, saying she had personal motivations for having been involved with Craig Jr., but she calmly responded, "Personal motivation? Yes. My motivation is not to allow the man who destroyed lives to go unpunished." One of the most significant turning points came when prosecutors presented newly discovered documents. Internal emails between bank directors from the 1990s discussing how to hide the foundation's funds. Names, dates, strategies. Everything there, in black and white. Craig Jr.'s expression changed for the first time. For the first time, his eyes wavered. But still, he remained silent. It was as if he already knew he had lost, and now he was fighting only for time. During a break in the trial, Thomas stepped outside to get some air. In the square in front of the courthouse, a woman approached him. It was Margareth, the client who had seen him being barred on the first day. "You gave us a voice, Thomas." "Thank you. God bless you." He just smiled. "I'm only here because two angels guided me. My mother and my father." The sun was breaking through the trees at that moment, like a silent beckoning from heaven. As if Mildred and Walter were there. Back in the courtroom, the judge announced, "A decision will be given in 3 days. All those involved remain in custody, and this court is committed to ensuring that the truth prevails." The city held its breath. As he left, the press surrounded Thomas. But he only said one thing: "God's justice may be delayed, but when it arrives, no one can stop it." And he got into the car with Sarah, without looking back. In the following days, news spread across the country. Springfield became a symbol of resistance. Churches held vigils. Children brought flowers to the foundation. It was as if the city was finally healing its old wounds. And then the third day arrived. The sentence would be read. Thomas braced himself, but something inside him told him it wasn't over yet. There was still one detail, a document no one had found yet. One last piece of the puzzle. And as he looked at Mildred's briefcase one last time, he saw a hidden compartment beneath the lining. With trembling hands, he opened it. And there it was, a letter. Sealed. With the judge's name on it. Written by her, years before. It was Mildred's last message. And perhaps, the play that would change everything again. The morning was calm in Springfield. The streets seemed suspended in time, as if the city were waiting for something long promised. Inside the courtroom, the judge held a sealed, weathered envelope bearing the foundation's gold crest. The name was handwritten, only for the day of judgment. The envelope had been delivered by Thomas the night before. Inside was a letter written by Mildred decades earlier. Sealed with wax. Never opened. It was as if she knew justice would be delayed, but that one day it would come. The judge broke the seal in front of everyone. There was absolute silence. All eyes were fixed on him. Mildred's words were clear, direct, prophetic. If this letter has reached your hands, it is because truth has conquered fear. And my son, Thomas, has found the way. She detailed the crimes, the embezzlement, the names involved. And in the end, she asked for one thing, that my son inherit not just a title or a trust, but that he inherit the mission of restoring Springfield's dignity. Thomas, his eyes brimming with tears, held tightly to his mother's wooden cross. It was as if she were there, speaking through the decades. Sarah wept beside him. The entire room listened in absolute silence. Even the most skeptical seemed touched. The judge then rose. Based on the documentation presented, the testimony, the evidence, and this historic letter, this court recognizes Thomas Crane Jefferson as the legal heir to the foundation and the legitimate plaintiff in the civil action against the Bank of Springfield. The applause was immediate. People stood. Many wept. But the judge wasn't finished yet. Furthermore, this court orders the federalization of the investigation and the freezing of the assets of all those involved in the banking frauds listed in the documents. Craig Jr. tried to get up, but was stopped. Handcuffed in front of everyone, he was led away in silence. As he left, his eyes met Thomas's. For the first time, there was fear. Not anger. Not arrogance. Just fear. Outside, the town celebrated. Church bells rang. Children released balloons bearing Bible verses. "The truth will set you free," was written on many of them. Springfield was reborn. But inside Thomas, the feeling was different. There was no euphoria. There was gratitude. There was peace. And there was something else, a silent call, as if Mildred were saying, "It's not over yet." Days later, he returned to the bank. Now under new management. The doors that had once been closed to him automatically opened. This time, not as a barred customer, but as president of the foundation that helped build it. The current manager led him to a special room. "There's something that belongs to you." It was a key. Golden. Heavy. With the same symbol found in the foundation's secret vault. The inscription, "Broken chains. Open paths." With it, Thomas opened a room that had been locked for decades. Inside were historical records, photos, manuscripts, and a safe built into the wall. When the safe opened, he found a sealed document, Social Reconstruction Plan, Project Hope. It was Mildred and Walter's original plan. A plan to turn bank profits into scholarships, housing, community centers, and free clinics. Everything that never came to fruition because of corruption. Now, in your hands. Sarah looked on in excitement. "They dreamed of this, Tom. And now, it's yours." But he replied, "It's ours. And the city's. We'll rebuild it all." And so the foundation's new arm was born, Mildred Crane Hope Project. In his first act, Thomas canceled the old debts of widows and veterans who had lost their homes due to bank failures. Each received a letter signed by him and a small wooden crucifix. You have not been forgotten. The town flourished. Schools received scholarships. Clinics were opened. And Mildred's name, buried for decades, was now remembered with honor. Her portrait hung in the bank's new lobby. Below, a plaque, "Faith sees what the eyes cannot see." On the first anniversary of the foundation's reopening, Thomas took the stage in the central square. Beside him were Sarah, Ellen, Harold, Margareth, and so many others who had resisted fear. It was a new era. This bank tried to silence us. It tried to erase our names. But God writes with letters that time cannot erase. His words were applauded. There was no script, only truth, and the echo of Mildred, present in every heart. But before he left the stage, he handed something to the city's new mayor, the Golden Key. "She doesn't belong to me. She belongs to Springfield. May doors never again be closed to those who seek the truth." That night, Thomas walked to the hill where his father was buried. He knelt silently. He placed a small cross beside the headstone. "I did it, Dad. And I know Mom is at peace. Now it's time to rest." But as he stood up, he saw a butterfly land on the cross. The same one he'd seen in the convent months ago. He smiled. "You're still here, aren't you?" And he continued walking, his steps firm but light, as if he'd accomplished his mission, but still had a long way to go. Because, deep down, the Golden Key was never just an object. It was faith. It was resilience. It was inherited love. And now it was a seed, planted in fertile soil, ready to blossom, generation after generation. And Springfield was never the same. Stories like Thomas's don't happen every day. They're born from silence, they grow in pain, but they blossom when someone decides to break the cycle of fear. And perhaps right now you're asking yourself, what if it were me? What if it were my truth, hidden within the walls of life? How many times has justice seemed too far away? How many times have you felt like you were fighting against something much bigger, much more powerful? And yet, you chose to keep believing? Thomas had no money. He had no fame. He only had faith. And it was with faith that he moved mountains that seemed insurmountable. Because when truth is born of love, it becomes invincible. Now I ask you, have you ever felt like something important was being hidden from you? Have you ever felt like you needed to seek answers, even if no one believed you? What would you do in Thomas's place? Don't let time erase what God wants to reveal. Believe, there are doors waiting for your golden key. Doors that only you can open, with courage, with prayer, with persistence. Before I go, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you with all my affection, if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This helps me continue bringing you real, transformative, and purposeful stories. And now, I invite you to reflect with me. Have you ever had to fight against something invisible, but very real? Have you ever been disbelieved, ignored, and still won? Share your experience in the comments. Your testimony could be the key for another woman. And finally, may God bless you with peace, discernment, and strength. May you never lose faith in better days, for God's truth, when it arrives, not only transforms stories, it changes destinies.